If someone watched your daily habits for just 1 week, they could predict your future with uncomfortable accuracy. Not because destiny is fixed or because your potential is limited, but because repetition tells the truth more clearly than intention ever does. What you repeat quietly becomes what you live loudly later. Most people believe their future will be decided by one big opportunity, one powerful decision, or one moment of motivation. In reality, futures are shaped by ordinary behavior repeated so often it stops being questioned. The way you begin your day, the way you respond under pressure, the things you avoid, the things you tolerate, and the standards you keep when no one is watching are already writing the story ahead of you. Repetition is honest because it does not care about what you want. It reflects what you practice. It exposes the gap between who you believe you are and who your habits are training you to become. Over time, that training hardens into identity, and identity eventually determines outcomes. This is why change feels difficult for so many people. They try to adjust goals while leaving habits untouched. They try to think differently while behaving the same. But the mind follows behavior, not the other way around. This audiobook exists for one reason: not to motivate you temporarily, not to inspire you emotionally, but to interrupt unconscious repetition and replace it with deliberate training. Because when repetition changes, direction changes. And when direction changes, the future follows whether you feel ready or not. Nothing in this process is dramatic, but everything in it is decisive. Chapter 1. They claim the day before it claims them. Successful people do not wake up into chaos. They do not open their eyes and immediately surrender their attention to the world. They do not allow messages, alerts, news, or other people's urgency to decide how their mind should feel. They understand something subtle but powerful. The mind in the early moments of the day is soft, not weak. Soft. It is impressionable. Open, quietly waiting to be shaped. Whatever touches it first leaves the deepest imprint. That is why they protect the beginning of the day with discipline that looks simple from the outside but is decisive on the inside. They do not rush. They do not react. They do not consume. They pause, even if only for a few minutes. Even if the day ahead is demanding. They give themselves a moment of ownership before the world begins pulling at them. This moment is not about productivity. It is about authority. When you wake up and immediately check your phone, your nervous system learns a lesson without words. It learns that your attention belongs to others, that your direction is external, that your value is reactive. Successful people refuse to start the day in submission. They may sit quietly. They may plan deliberately. They may breathe slowly and let their thoughts settle. Sometimes it is only one intentional thought, one clear sentence spoken internally, one reminder of who they are and what matters. But that single moment does something profound. It establishes leadership inside the mind. They decide the emotional temperature of the day before circumstances attempt to decide it for them. They choose direction before reaction, because reaction creates drift. And drift creates a life that feels busy but uncontrolled. Successful people know that the first hour is not about doing more. It is about becoming grounded. When the day begins grounded, decisions become cleaner. Focus becomes steadier. Pressure becomes manageable. When the day begins scattered, everything feels heavier than it needs to be. This is why they never skip this habit. Not on weekends. Not on holidays. Not when motivation is low. Because they understand that days stack quietly. One rushed morning does not ruin a life, but repeated rushed mornings train the mind to live in urgency, and urgency slowly replaces intention. Whoever controls the first hour controls the tone of the day, and the tone of your days becomes the texture of your life. A calm life is not built through luck. It is built through mornings that are claimed, not surrendered. This is where mastery begins. Chapter 2. They move without waiting for confidence. Successful people do not wait to feel confident before they begin. They understand that confidence is not something that appears first and then invites action. Confidence is something that forms only after movement has already started. While most people remain still, waiting for certainty, reassurance, or emotional readiness, successful people accept uncertainty as part of the process and move forward anyway. They know that hesitation feels intelligent, but quietly steals time. Waiting feels safe, but it is often fear disguised as preparation. The longer a person waits to feel ready, the more the mind learns avoidance instead of execution. Successful people refuse to train that habit. They act while the mind is still negotiating. They take steps while doubt is present. They begin even when clarity is incomplete. They understand that every meaningful path begins in discomfort. The first attempt is always imperfect. The early stage is always unstable. The beginning rarely feels confident, and expecting it to is a misunderstanding of how growth works. Confidence is not the entrance fee to progress. It is the reward for surviving repeated exposure to uncertainty. Successful people have learned that movement organizes the mind. When action begins, confusion slowly gives way to structure. When something is started, even poorly, the brain shifts from imagination to engagement. Fear loses some of its power because it no longer lives only in thought. It becomes something tangible, something that can be worked through instead of avoided. They do not wait for motivation because they understand that motivation is inconsistent and emotionally expensive. They rely instead on decision. Once a decision is made, they move regardless of mood. This creates a quiet form of strength. Over time, their nervous system learns that discomfort is not a signal to stop, but a signal that growth is happening. This habit is never skipped because waiting for confidence creates dependency. It teaches the mind that action requires permission from emotion. Successful people break that dependency early. They train themselves to act as a default response. They step forward before fear can fully organize itself into an excuse. Each time they move without confidence, something subtle happens. Self-trust increases, not because everything worked, but because they prove to themselves that they can operate without perfect emotional conditions. This is how resilience is built. This is how courage becomes quiet instead of dramatic. Eventually, confidence arrives, but it arrives late and quietly. It shows up after effort has already been invested and after discomfort has already been endured. By then, confidence is no longer something they chase. It becomes a byproduct of action taken repeatedly under imperfect circumstances. Successful people understand this sequence deeply. Decision first, action second, confidence last. And because they respect this order, progress becomes inevitable. Chapter 3: They guard their attention as if it were gold. Successful people understand that attention is not a small thing. It is not background noise. It is not something to be spent casually. Attention is the most limited resource a human being possesses, because whatever receives attention begins to shape thought, behavior, and identity. Time passes whether it is noticed or not, but attention decides what that time becomes. They have learned that where attention goes, energy follows, and where energy follows, results eventually appear. For this reason, they treat attention with the same seriousness others reserve for money or status. They do not give it away reflexively. They do not allow it to be pulled endlessly in every direction. They choose deliberately what deserves their focus and, just as importantly, what does not. They recognize that modern life is designed to fragment the mind. Endless information, constant updates, notifications, and opinions compete for awareness. Most people live in a permanent state of partial focus, never fully present, never fully engaged, always mentally divided. Successful people see this clearly and opt out whenever possible. They do not confuse consumption with rest. Scrolling, browsing, and constant input feel passive, but they quietly exhaust the mind. Successful people are aware that distraction drains energy even when the body is still. They choose fewer inputs and deeper engagement. They allow their mind to stay with one task long enough for real progress to occur. They also understand that attention trains the nervous system. When attention is scattered repeatedly, the mind learns impatience and restlessness. When attention is sustained, the mind learns calm, depth, and endurance. Over time, this training becomes visible in the quality of decisions they make and the stability with which they make them. This habit is never skipped because distraction does not only steal productivity, it weakens clarity, it blurs priorities, it slowly dissolves the ability to think deeply. Successful people protect their attention because they know that clarity is fragile and easily eroded by excess noise. They create boundaries not out of arrogance, but out of respect for their future. They say no more often than they say yes. They limit exposure to information that does not serve a clear purpose. They choose silence when others choose stimulation. They understand that boredom is not an enemy but a doorway to deeper thought. Over time, this discipline compounds. Focus becomes easier. Decision-making becomes faster. The mind feels less crowded and more precise. Life begins to feel intentional rather than reactive. Successful people do not guard their attention because they are disciplined by nature. They guard it because they understand its value. Attention, once spent, is gone forever, and a life shaped by intentional focus will always outperform a life shaped by constant distraction. This is why they treat attention as gold. Chapter 4. They honor their word to themselves. Successful people understand that the most important relationship they will ever manage is the one they have with themselves. Long before reputation matters to the world, credibility must exist internally. Every promise kept or broken in private trains the mind to either trust or doubt its own direction. They know that self-respect is not a feeling. It is a pattern of behavior repeated consistently when no one is watching. When they decide to do something, even something small, they follow through. Not because the task itself is significant, but because the act of honoring the decision reinforces internal authority. Most people underestimate the damage done by broken personal commitments. Skipped routines, delayed intentions, and ignored plans seem harmless in isolation, but over time, they create internal noise. The mind begins to hesitate. Confidence erodes quietly. Decision-making becomes weaker because the self no longer feels reliable. Successful people are aware of this process and refuse to participate in it. They choose fewer commitments, but they take those commitments seriously. They do not overload themselves with promises they cannot keep. They understand that discipline is not about doing everything, it is about doing what you said you would do. This habit is never skipped because it creates alignment. Thought, intention, and action move in the same direction. When this alignment exists, energy stops leaking. The mind becomes calmer. There is less internal negotiation, less self-doubt, and less resistance when action is required. They also understand that honoring their word to themselves builds a quiet form of confidence that does not rely on external validation. It does not need praise. It does not require recognition. It comes from knowing, at a deep level, that they can be trusted by themselves. Over time, this self-trust becomes visible in how they move through the world. Their decisions are firmer, their boundaries are clearer, their presence feels stable. Others may describe this as confidence, but it is simply integrity practiced privately. Successful people do not wait for motivation to keep their word. They understand that motivation fluctuates and integrity does not. They act based on commitment, not emotion. This allows them to remain consistent through boredom, fatigue, and discomfort. By honoring their word to themselves day after day, they build something most people never consciously develop: internal reliability. When pressure arrives, they do not collapse into hesitation. When opportunity appears, they do not second-guess their readiness. This is why this habit is never skipped. A person who trusts themselves becomes decisive. A decisive person becomes effective, and effectiveness compounds into success. Chapter 5. They train their body to support their future. Successful people do not separate the body from the future they are trying to build. They understand that ambition, clarity, patience, and resilience are not purely mental traits. They are physical states that depend heavily on the condition of the body that carries them. A tired body distorts judgment. An untrained body amplifies stress. A neglected body limits how long focus and discipline can be sustained. They do not treat physical training as a cosmetic project or a temporary phase. They treat it as infrastructure. Just as a building cannot stand without a strong foundation, long-term success cannot be sustained without physical capacity. Energy is not a luxury, it is a requirement. They move their body consistently, not aggressively, and not for appearance alone, but to regulate the nervous system and stabilize their internal state. Movement clears mental fog, it sharpens attention. It releases tension that would otherwise leak into decisions and interactions. Over time, this creates a mind that can remain calm under pressure and focused for longer periods. Successful people also understand the role of recovery. They respect sleep. They do not glorify exhaustion. They recognize that chronic fatigue is not a badge of honor, but a silent performance killer. Rest is not avoidance of work, it is preparation for it. Without recovery, discipline becomes brittle and breaks under stress. This habit is never skipped because physical neglect compounds quietly. At first, it shows up as irritation, indecision, and emotional volatility. Later, it appears as burnout, loss of motivation, and declining standards. Successful people interrupt this decline early by treating their body as an ally rather than an afterthought. They eat with awareness, not obsession. They understand that what enters the body influences clarity, mood, and energy levels far more than most people realize. They do not aim for perfection. They aim for consistency. Small, repeated choices matter more than extreme discipline followed by collapse. Over time, the body adapts, endurance increases, recovery improves, stress becomes easier to handle, the mind feels steadier and less reactive. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Better physical condition supports better decisions, and better decisions reinforce healthy habits. Successful people train their body not because they fear weakness, but because they respect the demands of the future they are building. They know that the life they want will require stamina, presence, and resilience. They prepare for that future in advance. This is why they never skip this habit. A strong future requires a body capable of carrying it. Chapter 6. They build systems that work on bad days. Successful people do not depend on motivation to carry them forward. They understand that motivation is emotional, unpredictable, and expensive. Some days it appears easily. Other days it disappears without warning. Building a life that relies on motivation alone is building on unstable ground. For this reason, successful people design systems that continue to function even when energy is low, focus is scattered, and enthusiasm is absent. They know that bad days are not failures. They are inevitable. Stress, fatigue, doubt, and emotional weight will appear regardless of intention. The difference between those who progress and those who stall is not the absence of bad days, but the presence of structures that prevent bad days from becoming lost days. A system is simply a set of repeated actions that require minimal decision-making. Successful people reduce the number of choices they must make when their mental resources are low. They pre-decide routines, schedules, and priorities so that action becomes automatic rather than debated. This conserves energy for what truly matters. They also understand that willpower is a limited resource. Each unnecessary decision drains it. Each internal argument weakens momentum. Systems remove these drains. When the path is clear, the mind does not need to negotiate. It simply follows what has already been decided. This habit is never skipped because consistency is built on reliability, not intensity. Anyone can perform well on good days. Successful people perform acceptably on bad days, and that is what compounds over time. Progress made during low-energy moments often matters more than progress made during high-energy moments because it proves sustainability. They design systems that are realistic, not heroic. They avoid extremes that cannot be maintained. They favor simple actions done repeatedly over ambitious plans that collapse under pressure. Their systems are flexible enough to adapt, but stable enough to endure. Over time, these systems create a sense of calm. Life feels less chaotic. Momentum becomes steadier. There is less guilt on low days and less burnout on high days. Action becomes a habit rather than a struggle. Successful people understand that discipline is not about forcing effort every day. It is about removing friction so that effort is no longer required. When systems are in place, progress becomes the default outcome rather than the result of constant self-control. This is why they never skip this habit. Systems carry them forward when emotion cannot. And a life carried by systems moves farther than a life carried by motivation alone. Chapter 7. They pause to see clearly. Successful people understand that movement without awareness eventually becomes drift. Progress does not only depend on effort, it depends on direction. Without regular pauses to reflect, even disciplined people can slowly move away from what truly matters without realizing it. For this reason, successful people intentionally create space to stop, observe, and see clearly. They do not confuse constant activity with effectiveness. They know that being busy can become a way to avoid uncomfortable truth. When life moves quickly, it becomes easy to ignore misalignment, inefficiency, or quiet dissatisfaction. Successful people resist this by slowing down long enough to examine their behavior honestly. When they pause, they ask themselves direct questions. They look at what is working and what is quietly draining energy. They examine patterns rather than isolated moments. They are willing to acknowledge mistakes without defensiveness and adjust without shame. Reflection for them is not an emotional exercise. It is a strategic one. This habit is never skipped because clarity prevents long-term damage. Small misalignments, if ignored, grow into major problems. Minor inefficiencies, if left unchecked, become chronic frustration. Successful people intervene early by paying attention while the cost of change is still low. They also understand that self-awareness sharpens decision-making. When you regularly observe your own behavior, you become faster at recognizing what aligns with your values and what does not. This reduces internal conflict. Decisions feel cleaner. Energy stops leaking into confusion. Pausing to see clearly also strengthens emotional intelligence. Successful people notice how stress, pressure, and fatigue influence their reactions. They learn when to push and when to pull back. They understand their own limits without using them as excuses. This self-knowledge allows them to operate with greater stability. Over time, this habit creates a sense of grounded confidence. Life no longer feels like something that is simply happening to them. They feel actively involved in shaping its direction. Reflection becomes a form of self-leadership rather than self-criticism. Successful people do not pause because they are uncertain. They pause because they are committed to precision. They understand that clarity is not found in constant motion, but in intentional stillness. This is why they never skip this habit. A person who can pause and see clearly will rarely move far in the wrong direction. Chapter 8. They wait without feeling behind. Successful people understand that progress does not always announce itself with speed. Some phases of growth require patience, restraint, and trust in timing rather than constant visible movement. While many people associate waiting with failure or inadequacy, successful people experience waiting as part of the process rather than a sign that something is wrong. They do not measure their worth by how fast things are happening. They are not disturbed by temporary stillness. They understand that rushing often leads to fragile outcomes, while deliberate pacing creates stability. When conditions are not right, they wait without panic and without self-judgment. This habit is never skipped because impatience quietly sabotages long-term success. When people feel behind, they make reactive decisions. They chase shortcuts. They accept opportunities that do not align. Successful people recognize this pattern and choose restraint instead. They have learned that comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose clarity. When attention shifts to what others are doing, internal alignment weakens. Successful people stay focused on their own trajectory. They understand that progress is not uniform and timelines are not transferable. Waiting for them is not passive. It is active preparation. They refine skills. They strengthen foundations. They build capacity quietly while results are still invisible. This allows them to move decisively when the moment arrives rather than scrambling to catch up. They also understand that emotional maturity is revealed in how one handles delay. Frustration and anxiety signal attachment to outcome without trust in process. Successful people learn to remain steady during uncertainty. This steadiness becomes an advantage when others are distracted by urgency. Over time, this habit creates a deep sense of internal security. They no longer feel pressured to prove progress constantly. They trust their systems. They trust their preparation. They trust their ability to act when timing aligns. Successful people do not fear being behind because they are anchored to direction rather than speed. They know where they are going, and that knowledge removes the anxiety of temporary pauses. This is why they never skip this habit. Those who can wait without feeling behind move forward with clarity, confidence, and strength when it matters most. Chapter 9. They learn quietly and apply deeply. Successful people approach learning with intention rather than urgency. They are not driven by the need to appear informed or to consume as much information as possible. They understand that knowledge is only valuable when it changes behavior, and for that reason they are selective about what they allow into their mind. They learn quietly, without announcing what they are studying or seeking validation for their curiosity. Their focus is not on collecting ideas, but on understanding principles deeply enough to use them. They are comfortable revisiting the same material repeatedly if it leads to clearer insight and stronger application. This habit is never skipped because shallow learning creates illusion. It creates the feeling of progress without actual change. Successful people avoid this trap by slowing down. They reflect on what they learn. They test it in real situations. They observe the results honestly and refine their approach accordingly. They also understand that not all information deserves equal attention. More input does not mean better thinking. Excessive information often creates confusion rather than clarity. Successful people choose depth over breadth. They prefer a few well-understood concepts applied consistently over many ideas applied sporadically. Application is where their learning becomes powerful. They translate insight into action deliberately and patiently. They do not rush implementation for the sake of momentum. They adjust based on feedback rather than forcing outcomes. This disciplined application turns knowledge into skill. Over time, this approach builds wisdom rather than noise. Their thinking becomes clearer. Their decisions become more grounded. They develop confidence not from knowing many things, but from knowing a few things well and using them effectively. They also understand that quiet learning protects humility. When learning becomes performative, ego interferes with growth. By learning privately, successful people remain open to correction and refinement. This openness allows them to continue improving long after others plateau. This is why they never skip this habit. Quiet learning combined with deep application compounds into mastery. And mastery, sustained over time, becomes one of the most reliable foundations of success. Chapter 10, they shape their environment to shape themselves. Successful people understand something most people never consciously realize. Their environment is always training them. Every space they enter, every object they see repeatedly, every sound they tolerate, and every distraction they allow is quietly influencing how they think, feel, and behave. Environment is not neutral. It is either supporting growth or reinforcing limitation. They do not leave this influence to chance. They understand that discipline is fragile when surrounded by friction. Willpower weakens in chaotic spaces. Focus dissolves when the environment constantly demands attention. For this reason, successful people intentionally design the spaces they live and work in so that the environment works with them instead of against them. They do not rely on motivation to overcome clutter, noise, or disorder. They remove the obstacles instead. They understand that the mind mirrors its surroundings. When the environment is crowded, the mind feels crowded. When the environment is calm, the mind becomes more precise. This habit is never skipped because environment operates continuously, even when a person is tired, even when distracted, even when emotionally low. The environment continues influencing behavior without asking permission. Successful people respect this power and use it deliberately. They simplify what surrounds them, not for minimalism as a trend, but for clarity as a function. They remove what distracts. They keep what serves a purpose. Everything in their space earns its place by either supporting focus, reinforcing identity, or reducing friction. They are aware that small environmental cues trigger automatic behavior. A phone within reach invites distraction. A cluttered desk invites avoidance. A noisy space invites impatience. Successful people design their surroundings so that the easiest action is the right action. They place tools where action is required. They remove temptations from easy access. They structure their space to reduce decision-making. This allows progress to happen almost without thought. The environment becomes a silent partner in discipline. They also understand that environment includes people. Energy, language, attitudes, and expectations shape behavior just as strongly as physical objects. Successful people are selective about who they allow consistent access to their time and attention. They avoid environments where negativity is normalized and stagnation is disguised as comfort. They do not attempt to change everyone around them. They simply choose where they spend their presence. This choice alone protects momentum. Over time, it also reinforces identity. You become more of what your environment reflects back to you. They are intentional with digital environments as well. Screens are environments. Information streams are environments. Successful people limit exposure to content that distorts perception or encourages comparison, urgency, or emotional volatility. They curate what enters their mind because they understand that thoughts are shaped by repeated input. This habit is never skipped because environment influences behavior even when awareness fades. On days when discipline feels low, environment carries the weight. On days when motivation disappears, environment maintains direction. On days when pressure rises, environment stabilizes. Over time, this intentional shaping compounds. Focus becomes easier, calm becomes familiar, productivity becomes natural rather than forced. The mind stops fighting the surroundings and begins cooperating with them. Successful people do not wait until life feels organized before shaping their environment. They shape the environment first, knowing that order outside creates order inside. They understand that environment is one of the few forms of leverage that works quietly, consistently, and relentlessly. They do not seek perfection. They seek alignment, a space aligned with their values, a routine aligned with their goals, a surrounding that reflects where they are going, not where they have been. This is why they never skip this habit. When the environment is designed with intention, discipline stops feeling heavy, growth stops feeling forced. The surroundings begin to pull the person forward instead of holding them back. And when the environment is aligned, success becomes less about struggle and more about consistency. Chapter 11, they remain calm when pressure arrives. Successful people understand that pressure is not an interruption of progress. It is part of it. Pressure arrives whenever responsibility increases, whenever stakes rise, and whenever growth begins to matter. Instead of being surprised by pressure or treating it as a threat, successful people expect it and prepare for it long before it appears. They know that pressure does not create character, it reveals it. When stress enters the moment, habits surface automatically. This is why they train calm deliberately. Calm is not a personality trait, it is a practiced response. It is built through repetition, awareness, and self-regulation over time. They do not deny stress or pretend it does not exist. They feel it fully without allowing it to hijack their behavior. They understand that emotional reaction narrows perception. When emotions spike, thinking becomes rigid and options disappear. Remaining calm keeps the mind open and flexible. This habit is never skipped because panic is expensive. It leads to rushed decisions, unnecessary conflict, and long-term consequences that far outweigh the temporary relief of reaction. Successful people slow down when others accelerate emotionally. They breathe when others tense. They listen when others interrupt. They have trained their nervous system to recognize pressure as a signal to become more deliberate rather than more frantic. This training often begins in small moments, pausing before responding, creating space between stimulus and reaction, choosing measured responses over impulsive ones. Over time, these small choices rewire the stress response itself. They also understand that calmness under pressure is not passive. It is not hesitation, it is control. Calm allows them to see details others miss. It allows them to prioritize effectively. It allows them to act with precision rather than force. This steadiness becomes a visible advantage. Others may feel unsettled or overwhelmed, but successful people appear anchored. Their presence brings stability to situations that might otherwise spiral. This earns trust and leadership without them having to demand it. They also recognize that pressure exposes internal narratives. When pressure rises, old beliefs surface: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of loss. Successful people observe these narratives without surrendering to them. They understand that thoughts under pressure are not commands, they are signals to be examined. Over time, remaining calm during pressure becomes familiar. The body no longer interprets stress as danger, but as information. This shift allows successful people to recover faster, think clearer, and perform consistently even when conditions are demanding. This is why they never skip this habit. Calm under pressure preserves clarity. Clarity preserves judgment. And judgment, preserved in difficult moments, is what separates those who endure from those who lead. Chapter 12, they never stop training the skill of wealth. Successful people reach a moment that most people misunderstand. It is not the moment of arrival. It is not the moment of success. It is the moment when they realize that nothing is finished, that there is no final level. That comfort is the most dangerous signal of all. This realization changes everything. They understand that wealth is not something you achieve and then protect forever. It is something you must continuously maintain, refine, and upgrade. The moment training stops, decay begins quietly. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. They have seen this pattern too many times to ignore it. People who reach a certain level and assume the work is over. People who stop learning because they believe they know enough. People who cling to outdated strategies because they once worked. Successful people refuse this illusion. They understand that the world changes faster than identity wants to adapt. Markets evolve, technology shifts, human behavior transforms. What worked once may slowly lose effectiveness. The only way to stay aligned is to remain a student permanently. This habit is never skipped because stagnation feels comfortable before it becomes costly. The absence of challenge feels like peace until it reveals itself as decline. Successful people do not wait for pain to force growth. They choose growth while things are still working. They continuously train their thinking. They examine assumptions that once felt solid. They question habits that once felt automatic. They refine decision-making frameworks that once felt complete. This is not insecurity, it is precision. They understand that wealth is not only financial, it is cognitive, it is emotional, it is behavioral. The ability to earn, sustain, and expand wealth depends on how well the mind adapts under pressure, uncertainty, and responsibility. They train patience as deliberately as they train ambition. They train restraint alongside expansion. They train long-term thinking even when short-term reward is available. This balance protects them from self-sabotage disguised as success. They also understand that each new level demands a new version of self. The habits that built the foundation are not always the habits that sustain the structure. Identity must evolve. Standards must rise. Discipline must deepen. This is where many people fail. They try to carry old behaviors into new environments. They resist internal change while demanding external growth. Successful people accept that discomfort is the cost of evolution. They continue reading, they continue studying, they continue listening, but more importantly, they continue applying and refining. They are not impressed by information. They are impressed by effectiveness. They do not chase novelty, they chase alignment. They also understand that ego is the greatest threat to long-term wealth. The belief that one has arrived shuts down learning instantly. Successful people remain alert to this danger. They stay humble not out of modesty, but out of strategy. They surround themselves with environments and people that challenge their thinking rather than flatter it. They invite feedback that sharpens rather than soothes. They understand that comfort does not improve performance. As responsibility grows, they train emotional regulation more seriously. Wealth amplifies pressure. Decisions affect more people. Consequences become heavier. Without emotional training, success becomes unstable. They prepare for this long before it is visible. They also refine how they recover. Burnout is not a failure of effort. It is a failure of sustainability. Successful people learn how to rest strategically, how to reset mentally, and how to return sharper rather than depleted. They train perspective. They zoom out regularly. They remind themselves that short-term losses do not define long-term trajectory. This prevents emotional overreaction and preserves clarity during volatility. They also train restraint around identity. They do not allow success to harden them. They remain adaptable, curious, open. This flexibility allows them to pivot without panic when circumstances change. They understand that the skill of wealth includes knowing when to push and when to pause, when to invest and when to conserve, when to speak and when to remain silent. These judgments cannot be automated. They require continuous awareness. They never stop refining how they think about time. Time is not something to fill. It is something to allocate intentionally. They become increasingly selective as they progress. Fewer commitments, deeper focus, higher standards. They also train how they handle loss. Loss is inevitable at scale. Deals fail, opportunities disappear, reputations fluctuate. Successful people learn to absorb loss without becoming reckless or withdrawn. They remain steady. They understand that consistency across decades beats intensity across seasons. This long view shapes every decision. They ask not only whether something works, but whether it can be sustained. They do not romanticize struggle, but they respect it. They know that growth will demand periods of discomfort, solitude, and uncertainty. They do not interpret these phases as signs of failure. They interpret them as training intervals. They also train gratitude deliberately, not as positivity but as grounding. Gratitude prevents entitlement. Entitlement erodes discipline. Discipline protects wealth. This chain matters. They understand that the skill of wealth is deeply internal. External systems help, but internal calibration determines longevity. How you think when no one is watching. how you respond when control is limited, how you adapt when certainty disappears. They never stop training these internal skills because they know that money magnifies who you already are. If discipline is weak, wealth exposes it. If clarity is unstable, wealth destabilizes faster. Successful people prepare for this by strengthening the internal structure continuously. They do not wait until success tests them. They train before the test arrives. This is why they never stop training the skill of wealth, not because they are afraid of losing it, but because they respect what it takes to sustain it. Wealth, once earned, demands maturity. Wealth, once expanded, demands wisdom. Wealth, once sustained, demands evolution. Those who stop training eventually fall behind, even if they appear successful for a time. Those who continue training quietly compound advantages that others cannot see until it is too late to catch up. This is the final habit, and it is never finished. Because wealth is not a destination. It is a discipline practiced for life. And those who understand this never truly stop growing. Success is rarely the result of one bold decision or one dramatic turning point. It is shaped quietly, through repetition, through what is practiced when no one is watching, and through what is done even when it feels ordinary or uncomfortable. The habits you repeat daily become the structure of your life long before results appear. Every habit you honor reinforces an identity. Every habit you skip weakens it. Over time, this process becomes invisible, but its outcomes do not. The life you live years from now will be the direct reflection of what you consistently chose to do or avoid in moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Most people search for breakthroughs while ignoring foundations. They wait for motivation, confidence, or perfect conditions, unaware that stability is built through consistency rather than inspiration. The truth is that nothing extraordinary is required to change direction. What is required is precision, the willingness to do simple things repeatedly without negotiating with yourself. This audiobook was not created to entertain or energize you temporarily. It was created to remind you that growth is not mysterious. It is methodical. It rewards those who understand that discipline is not restriction, but freedom from drift. It rewards those who are willing to train rather than hope. What you never skip becomes your baseline. Your baseline becomes your standard, and your standard determines how far you can go without resistance. If there is one truth to carry forward, let it be this: you do not rise to the level of your goals, you settle into the level of your habits. And once habits are established, life begins to follow them effortlessly. Wealth is not a moment, it is not a number, it is not an event. It is a skill expressed through behavior, through decision-making, and through consistency over time. Train it daily. Protect it quietly. Respect it deeply. This was 1% Mastermind Audio. And now, the responsibility returns to you.